This week on Wealth Track, great global value investor Tom Russo looks for leading consumer brand companies with the capacity to reinvest and what he calls the capacity to suffer. Why both qualities matter are next on Consuelo Mack Wealth Track. I began the interview by asking Russo about his view that so much of investing has to do with storytelling.
I think it defines the parameters in which successful investors operate, and it helps describe the questions that are best asked. I remember the firm I trained with, the Sequoia Fund, Bill Ruane used to have a question that he would ask of managements when we'd visit, for example, and he'd say, what are the chances that your business will lose money next year? And all of the conversation of Wall Street was about whether the firm would earn $2.10 or $2.11. And Bill would say, what are the odds that you'll lose money? And of course, the management team is first perplexed. Finally, they're a bit disturbed. And at the end of it, they'll say something like, well, look, for that to happen, the following three things would have to happen. Well, those are the only three things you should care about. And so, the device, the technique of investing, you have to learn how to ask the right questions. And I always remembered the one that Bill Ruane used so well.
So what kind of stories make the best investments as far as you are concerned?
Well, I would say the best stories for me, or the best investments for me, are those businesses that have the ability to reinvest. Since we manage money for taxable investors, and our goal is not to have a large amount of turnover, which triggers taxes and forces you to learn deeply about businesses on a regular basis, which I find to be elusive at best. So by staying with the businesses that we know and understand, if they have the capacity to reinvest, we're much better off than if they don't.
And explain what the capacity to reinvest means. Because if you talk to most Wall Street analysts, for instance, or portfolio managers, they're saying, no, we want the capacity we want free cash flow.
Yeah.
We want generated returns that are going to go to stockholders. So we want to see you, Mr. CEO or Ms. CEO, return cash to me in the forms of stock buybacks and the returns of dividends. But the capacity to reinvest means what to you?
Well, it means just the opposite of what Wall Street's asking of management. And I find that we're on a very divided play field at that point. When I meet with management, my advice to them is to make sure they invest every penny possible. The jargon
of what the rest of Wall Street is telling
me. The jargon today is cash flow conversion, and that means how much of your reported net income per share can you pay out to investors. Well, Wall Street likes that number to be over 100%. I'd just as soon have it be zero. I just as soon have the business have prospective uses for capital that are sufficient to consume all of the net income, let's say. And it's an example that's been kind of pushed to my awareness through watching Berkshire develop all these years. They never once paid out the money that they generated, and they had ample internal uses for it. And watching that compound take place over decades based on retaining and then reinvesting well. And reinvesting in a way that wasn't orthodox in the first place. It's unorthodox for a firm like Berkshire to hold $55 billion in cash at any given time, just waiting for the next best opportunity, but it's given them an enormous amount of competitive advantage over the years.
Berkshire Hathaway, of course, is one of your largest holdings, but a criticism of Berkshire Hathaway and any other company that holds a large hoard of cash is that I'm not paying you guys to basically hold cash. I'm paying you to invest the capital to my benefit as a shareholder.
And I think the answer is simply over what period of time. The need to have it happen immediately will prevent the better long-term returns that Berkshire can generate by having the flexibility of having capital available. I mean, the lamenting of how difficult it was to invest that money in 2007 and 2006 allowed for enormous returns when 2008 came along, and that $55 billion worth of cash had a very high calling to help bail out General Electric or Goldman Sachs or Harley-Davidson at rates of above 10, 12, and 14% respectively. He may have not earned much along the way, but when the time came that the money was worth a lot, he knew how to charge and he had it available.
We talked about the capacity to reinvest. What you call the capacity to suffer. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll give an example of Brown-Forman, which,
my favorite manufacturer of my favorite bourbon, which is Jack Daniels.
Yes, Jack Daniels. And 28 years ago, their shares collapsed because there was a problem with poorly situated reinvestment. They bought a California cooler business that was quite poor. They owned Lennox, they owned Hartman, a bunch of businesses non-core to Jack Daniels. And by the time I came around in 1987, they had so exhausted anything that they could do outside of Jack that they resolved as a family to take their free cash flow and develop the global business. Now, at the time, they only had 5 markets around the world where Jack Daniels sold more than 50,000 cases. But they were willing to invest against current income because it's expensive to open up markets. They were willing to invest for their future based on the one thing they knew they could trust, which is the strength of Jack Daniels. They had to pioneer it in markets around the world. And if you fast forward to today, after having spent 27 years sort of carefully cultivating this business in international markets, they now have 50,000 cases in over 50 markets. So from 5 markets to 50, they've been able to get that brand established. And that's been very expensive. And so along that period of time, they were deploying their capital to fund it. And the burden on income meant that they were probably understating their natural profit. But in so doing, they built an enormous opportunity for the future.